What's going on, y'all? Good morning, good night, wherever you're at around the world. We got some interesting stuff here. So, this is why I like reading comments because sometimes they can give you some good insight. Let's start off with Tobias's comment here. This is some important info here. One, we're going to get to an interview about Thomas Lockley that not a lot of people know about that he had with Ubisoft's podcast. And there's some very key information in here. But right here it says Yasuke's involvement and Honoji incident is only found in the Jesuits' account. Now you're gonna realize why this is important because I'm gonna take you to something else. Remember that on the account of the event. A problem I noticed is that it's not corroborated by the Japanese sources. The Shinchokoki, Lord Nobunaga Chronicle, Akechi Gunki, War Chronicles of the Akechi clan, and Korito Tajiki, a record of the events leading up to Nobunaga's funeral, from the Honoji incident through the Battle of Yamazaki, Shiren Sokai, origins of the Owari retainer. She's saying all this for a reason. Akechi Mitsuhide no Shotai are just some of the sources that cover the Honoji incident, and not a single one of them mention Yasuke, nor even cite the infamous event where Akechi Mitsuhide called Yasuke an animal. Louis Froys is known for exaggerating certain facts or making things up, like Nobunaga dressing himself as the Demon King of the 6-7, which is not supported by a Japanese account, though it made its way to pop culture. So this is Western influence by Westerners, making the Jesuit report rather dubious. Going by Jesuit's Lockley account, it is said that Yasuke went to Nobunaga to warn him of Akechi's treachery, but the Japanese records state it was Sada. Let me remove this for you guys because I had it highlighted so you can see. Sadakatsu Morai, and I looked into this guy. Morai Sadakatsu, 1528, June 21st to 1582, was a Japanese samurai of the Sengoku period through the early Azushi Momoyama period, who served the Oda clan. He was active in the Oda clan's administration in Kyoto. In the siege of Shiga in September of 1507, he entered the fort of Anota with Sakuma Nobumori, Akechi Mitsuhide, Karari Hidataka, and Sasa Narimisa. These are all the people that were around that time. He died in 1582 during the incident at Honoji. That's Japanese history right there. So they're telling something different here. It seems like we're being fed stuff that people have manipulated in the media by the Jesuits and not the Japanese. And that's where all that was coming from. Let's continue because we're going to go into some stuff, and Thomas Lockley's going to mention some stuff about a Jesuit document where he's citing his stuff from. Now, this comment has more legit info than fake wiki entries of Yasuke's page. Let's keep going down here. I got one more for y'all. Because the Shincho Koki, these are all Japanese by the way, that's why I translated it to English, is a handwritten manuscript. There are over 60 different versions. Pay attention to this. Only one version contains information that suggests Yasuke was a samurai. This scholar only references that one version. 60 versions versus that one. Which one do you believe? And that one is the Jesuits. And this guy comes down. I would like to emphasize that even that document is not conclusive evidence that he was a samurai, but merely presents the possibility. That's what Ubisoft was talking about, and that's what Thomas Lockley was talking about. So all this stuff that y'all have been listening to has been off of that one document that the Jesuits left. They ignored all Japanese documents, which is why they didn't want to work with Japan, and this is all based off of what the Jesuits of Rome has said. This whole time. And this is the guy that recommended me to listen to the podcast here. Okay, I have just listened to Ubisoft's podcast, Echoes of History, and this season is covering the Sengoku period, and it features our favorite spin doctor, Thomas Lockley, and I was shocked to hear him quote that there is no evidence that Yasuke was ever received any training to be ordained as a samurai. We're about to go into this, and he was like, I really spat my coffee out. He then went on to say that the only evidence, if you call it that, we have of Yasuke engaging in martial science is painting a black guy engaged into sumo wrestling. Hardly to rate the Shogun stuff, Lockley also went to say that during that period of Sengoku timeline, anyone could use the sword to some degree was considered and conscripted in the army, and they are now known as Ashiguru, basically a foot soldier, not a samurai. And I'm going to get to that point. It's right here, but we're going to rewind it so you guys can look at some stuff. It's on Spotify. You ready?
I'd still give it a go. It's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
Do we know whether Yasuke undergoes any kind of formal samurai training? So he's often remembered as a samurai. As you mentioned, we don't really know what that means at this time. Does he undergo any kind of training in using a Japanese sword, or is it literally the case that Nobunaga gives him a sword and then we count him as a samurai?
Well, the romantic in me would like to say yes. Of course, he had training. The historian in me says probably not. The nearest...
Probably not. The historian in me. Probably not. God damn.
we can get to any evidence is that picture of sumo wrestling. Sumo wrestling is a martial art.
Sumo wrestling would be the evidence of him being a samurai. Based off of Jesuit documents too, by the way. What the hell does sumo wrestling have to do with becoming a samurai? Wow. Mind equals blown. That's why you gotta listen to me. I know what I'm talking about. I didn't even need to go this far, but you see the light within me, as I told you. It's gonna guide me to the right stuff. Wants to put this in front of people's face who are ignorant and don't know what they're talking about, and people who don't want to reason. So this is hardcore evidence. Deny this if you want. You are the biggest moron on the planet.
It's a preparation for war for warriors. I know there's some evidence that he's certainly engaged within martial pursuits, shall we say. But beyond that, it's impossible to say.
What?
Did we just hear that? There is no evidence he was a samurai at all. We had the 60 documents that stated he didn't even exist as a samurai, nor was he there with Nobunaga. Then we had that one Jesuits that were saying that, and then they even, Ubisoft admitted that they know this because they were only using that. It's called taking the 1% out of the 99% and magnifying it. Bam! Game over. That's why I stepped in, because I knew I was going to find this and do the right thing. Shut your mouth and never say nothing again. You ignorant imbeciles.
Does Yasuke's story tell us about medieval Japanese society and about their view of foreigners? I think we quite often have this idea that Japan was quite a closed society and culture for large periods of time, but it seems like they're quite welcoming during this period.
I would say so, partly because at this period, Japan was in the midst of the civil war and people were coming from the outside all the time. And they were bringing in all sorts of useful things, technologies to mine silver, which then would be processed into weapons. These are all Chinese technologies, by the way. Technology for making castles, technologies for increased food supply so you can feed more soldiers. And then the Europeans come in with these fancy boats and these fancy guns. The Japanese immediately copy these guns and start manufacturing on a massive scale, to the extent that there is a belief that there were more guns in Japan by the end of that century than the whole of the world put together. You can time it to about a 50-year period where so many guns were made that it eclipses all the guns in the rest of the world. People have had this idea of disconnection or xenophobia, perhaps. You've also got this country that is doing more to introduce foreign ideas for their own use than probably any other country in the world at the time. So there is a disconnect there, and I'm pretty certain that Yasuke, as being part of this new wave of new blood, if you like, would have definitely endeared him to the people around him. And the fact that he could speak, in fact, he's obviously a man who had charm and personality, would really, really have made a big difference, I think.
Yeah. His arrival timed well with Nobunaga being there, who was willing to embrace all of this and welcome it. And I guess if we're being slightly cynical, Nobunaga is thinking about what he can get out of all of this new technology and everything else.
That's not cynical at all. That's 100% what he was doing. He was a man who was on a mission to end 100 years of war, partly for his own benefit, but partly also for the people under him. And the people who he ruled over loved him, quite literally, because he brought peace. He brought economic prosperity. He brought all sorts of benefits, which when you're in a bandit-ridden place, pirates on the seashore, bandits coming down from the mountains, Nobunaga was the person to sort all those problems out. He did it with an iron fist, or with gunpowder and lead. He would have seen all of these as benefits for himself and for his mission.
And in that environment, a 6'4" guy who knows how to fight is another benefit.
And also, there is one thing that I haven't talked about yet, but the Buddha or various deities are often depicted as black-skinned in Japan, even today, but they were even more so in those days, as far as we know. Therefore, this very, very dark, not light.
The Buddha originates from India, and Indians have a certain type of skin color, so they would be considered tan or brown like Indians. As far as getting into that, that's a little bit irrelevant. But we know where that comes from. That goes back to India. And by the way, we can go back here a little bit too. I don't mind, but I kind of wanted to let y'all hear what he was saying here instead of like overreacting.
Brown skin, but very dark skin. He's described as having skin the color of ink, black ink. Is, for many people, might almost have seemed godly or divine in some respect. So Nobunaga would have been in a position of having this divine giant behind him as his bodyguard or as one of his closest circles. I mean, that's one interpretation.
He's fantasizing again, by the way. Don't take this face value. If I want to hear about Buddha, I'm going to go to India. I already know about him, though. He's a demigod. And he's a being of the air. The word Buddha means the man who woke up from the dream. But something had to wake him up, obviously. You have in today's world people trying to spread misinformation saying he's the same as Christ, and God, no, he's not. He didn't die for you. He's not God, and he's not the Son. He didn't resurrect. He didn't do any of that. They're not the same. He's in the air, but Lucifer is the prince of the air. Just to clarify that. But there's nothing wrong with learning from demigods. There's nothing wrong with learning from all sorts of people. You can learn a lot by going through evil, big time. But we just need to be careful not to make that as a false idol. Learn, but don't make it an idol. Now, the interesting thing about Thomas Lockley is that you see this podcast is called Yasuke, the First African Samurai, but he clearly states there's no evidence that he was a samurai at all. We know he wasn't, obviously. I mean, I don't need to go through all this, but it's just good to put this proof in front of people's face. And it's like, it just shows you that they really just want to do this because this is their agenda. And he wants to tell his story. And remember, all this stuff is going back to that Jesuit document. And that's why I want to rewind so I can bring you guys to that. So we'll get back to 1755. Like I said, if you want to come listen to this, you can. It's on Spotify. So let's see when he introduces Thomas Lockley and all this stuff he says, which I think is funny. I think it's about right here.
Welcome to Echoes of History, Thomas. It's great to have you on.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a true honor to be with you today.
I can't wait to find out more about this incredible figure who is a playable character in Assassin's Creed Shadows. I think our audience would like to know as much about him as they possibly can too. So to start off with, can you tell us a little bit about Yasuke's life, or what we do or don't know about him before he arrives in Japan? Where does he come from?
Well, we know that he's from Africa, but we don't know for certain which part of Africa, apart from that it would have been on the East Coast.
That's what a lot of people are saying, but nobody knows for sure unless we look at the historical documents and say that it was written down and he told somebody that. But we do know that he was African, and I think that's what matters. That's not really so much the issue here. The
descriptions we have from Japanese descriptions are very much of somebody from what is now South Sudan. Very tall, very black, very strong. Whereas there's a couple of sources which suggest he might have come from the Mozambique area. However, he doesn't fit the description very much of people from that region. There's also the full possibility that he could have been somehow trafficked from the South Sudan area down south and come through Mozambique as well. And I think possibly that might be what we're looking at here.
Okay, so we don't really know too much about his life sort of before he appears in Japan.
We don't know about his exact life. We can work back with research to the life of people like him. The majority of people like him were mercenaries in India, having been trafficked from Africa for the express purpose of becoming soldiers. Highly likely that if he came from the northeast Sudan area, that he was employed as a soldier in India and then employed as a bodyguard when the Jesuits were coming further east to Japan, which is in the middle of a century of war already. Jesuits can't carry swords or weapons, but they can employ people that do. And Yasuke was a perfect employee in that sense, a bodyguard.
Interesting. So we can sort of surmise that he may well have been trafficked, that he's likely to have been in India, and that he's likely to have some sort of a military background, some sort of military training by the time he arrives in Japan too.
We don't know that, but what we do know is that the Jesuits did get him, and I don't think by love. Come on, we need to know who the Jesuits are. They go back to the Roman Empire and the Spanish Inquisition.
So then how and when does he arrive in Japan? What do we know about him coming to Japanese shores?
Well, he arrived in May 1579 on a ship from Macau. to get from Africa, whichever part of Africa it was, to Macau and then to Japan, he'd already spent time in India. He'd spent time in Malacca, in modern-day Malaysia. And
by the way, we don't know that. The documents don't state that, but I've read some stuff about it, but it links to his book and certain other aspects. I'd rather hear from Japan because they have the historical documents. That's why I wanted to look at those 2 sheets. Because this guy likes to fill in so many blanks with his imaginations that are not real. It's just a lot of guessing and projecting what he thinks based off of what he wants to say. But if Japan is not telling me that, I'm not taking it serious. Because a lot of his stuff goes back to the Jesuits, and I don't trust that.
I think it was about 6 to 9 months in Macau. They're waiting for the winds to go. He was the bodyguard of a Jesuit, the head Jesuit in Asia, essentially the head of the Christian church in Asia, a man called Alessandro Valiano. Mm-hmm. And Valiano was on a tour from Rome. He'd been sent by the Pope to tour the new missions in Asia and, of course, Japan.
You see what I say? See what I'm saying? Rome. Listen to what I'm saying. I know what I'm talking about. Another thing is that what he's talking about, these are missionaries. These are the people that ran around back in the days cutting your head off.
Japan was the furthest of these missions, so it was the last place that he eventually got to.
Interesting. So he's coming as part of a Jesuit mission. Could he have been
missionaries?
Christian? Do you have any idea of his religious background at this point?
But it's highly likely that he would have been Christian, at least on paper. I don't think the Jesuits would have employed him necessarily if he hadn't. And in any respect, at this time, let's just say conversion was enforced often. I mean, he would have been taken as a kid, and therefore, he's probably not got a lot to say in exactly the circumstances of his early life. It's only when we get to his adulthood, when he gets to Japan, that he actually has some agency, as far as we can tell.
Interesting that the agency comes with arriving in Japan. Hopefully we can come back to that a little bit later. What do we know about how the Japanese react to Yasuke's appearance on Japanese shores? Would he have been perhaps the first African they might have encountered?
Well, you've got to remember, Japan, one, is a big country, even today. And the people that would have encountered him first on the west coast in Kyushu, what is the modern island of Kyushu, would not have been the same, even in vague contact, really, with Senda. There was no newspapers, there was no television, there was no podcasts in those days. So the people in the West will have seen many Africans in their ports, through Chinese ships, through Portuguese ships. Therefore, he wouldn't have been such a big thing there. What the Japanese sources say about him is that he stood out for his size. Not necessarily for the fact that he's African, although, of course, the fact that he's black and very different is very, very important, but it's his size. He would have been considered a very big man today. In those days, he was considered a giant, about 6'2" to 6'4" in imperial measurements, which is about 178 centimeters, I believe. He was a big guy, and the average Japanese person was around 150 centimeters at the time, and that's probably an optimistic average. So he would have been literally more than a head above everybody else.
Yeah, standing head and shoulder.
But there was a samurai there that was like 6'5", 6'6". He was a Japanese samurai, big, huge dude. He was bigger than him. There were some of them running around in Japan too. People just don't say much about them. If you play games like Dynasty Wars stuff, you could see some of them, some of those huge ass dudes in there. So it's not like they don't exist, but it's just not like the common average size of Japanese male. But there was somebody bigger and stronger than him, and they were trained too, like very trained. There's no evidence in any of this that says that he did any training. He's just speculating. Nobody says any of that. Now, as far as him like being a bodyguard and being able to fight, that's different. You know what I mean? But samurai, no.
There's above everyone else.
With big shoulders as well.
Yeah, we quite a striking figure for them to see for a variety of reasons then. What do we know about how he might have begun to communicate with Japanese people? Presumably he arrives, like a lot of the Jesuits, with a big language barrier.
Probably not, actually. The Jesuits were big linguists, and many of them were trained beforehand.
They were, but not him.
And to be able to speak the languages of the people they were trying to convert. Yasuke is recorded 2 years afterwards as having quite a good level of Japanese. Of course, he could have started to learn it when he arrived 2 years before, but Valiano himself, the visitor, the chief inspector of churches, if you like, was a big proponent of learning any language. He started the concept of Asian studies.
Now, I want you to listen closely to what he's saying here. He said when he got there, there's no way he could have known Japanese. Obviously not. It takes a long time to learn that. It's one of the hardest languages in the world. Now, listen up to what he said who he's about to meet soon. And remember, he only stayed with him 15 months. That's why I said this 2-3 year stuff is all made up.
Asian language studies in Europe was started by him. He was the person who insisted that his missionaries study Chinese, Japanese, various Indian languages. So it's conceivable that Yasuke had already started to learn Japanese before he arrived.
And I guess the big question
Just said he
is
didn't.
how on earth does this guy who arrives as a Jesuit
boy.
bodyguard from Africa via India end up being a Japanese samurai?
Well, when I said that in the West, they were probably quite used to Africans, apart from the size of this particular man, Yasuke, when he got to the center of the country, the capital area, what is now near Kyoto, Osaka, they probably had never seen an African before. He was swamped, literally swamped. There's several records of him being mobbed by crowds trying to touch him, see him. Houses fell down because they were getting on top of the houses to get a look at him. In one of the processions in a place called Sakai, basically the procession of people was broken up, it was destroyed, and he had to get on a horse to escape. And one can imagine that there was some muscles got in to push people out of the way. Another one, when getting to Miyako, which is now Kyoto, a huge mob literally.
He's not saying anything about him becoming one at all. All he's doing is just making up nonsense. But we already covered that. He admitted that later on in the podcast, but we're just letting this play.
Surrounded the mission and almost pushed the mission down, throwing stones. There were dead people in the crowd outside. And at that point, Nobunaga, who was the most powerful warlord in Japan at the time, was 5 minutes walk away. He heard this huge hullabaloo, if you like. He heard what was going on.
So he's already heading towards Nobunaga. Remember, he was only with him for 12 months to 15 months. Then he fled off and went back to the missionaries. What is this 2 or 3 year stuff that they're talking about? He didn't speak Japanese. And he wasn't a samurai. I already caught all that. The great detectives already did that work. You already caught with that, buddy.
And he demanded to see who was disturbing the peace. Demanded that this person be brought before him, and hence the date with destiny, if you like. Yasuke is brought to the most powerful man and probably the most infamous man in the whole of Japanese history. It's not just that he was powerful then. This is a man who you go into any bookshop in Japan, there will be a book about him, even today.
By the way, this is not in Japanese documents like this. This is just Jesuit stories. That one document that we were talking about out of the 60s. And just, adding on stuff that he wants to add.
It's very difficult to say just how much of a famous figure he is. He's something like a Napoleon or a Winston Churchill in the European sense. They hit it off, bizarrely, perhaps. But also, Nobunaga was a man that thought out of the box. He thought differently. He was the first proponent of mass guns, supposedly invented the mass volley, which Europeans later on copied and put to good use all around the world. He also was very, very keen on dressing up in strange clothes, Chinese clothes, barbarian clothes, meaning Portuguese clothes, etc., etc. And there's lots of records of that. So the fact that he would have employed an African is not actually that strange. He did have Chinese employees, and he specifically, although he couldn't employ Jesuits, specifically kept Jesuits.
Of course he did. That's where one of the original places on Earth where martial arts existed, and in India. Martial arts? Yeah, we go back to those ancient worlds, they were highly, highly advanced. So of course he wants that.
Jesuits near him for fun, to talk about things like maps and globes and building works and things like that, which the Jesuits were very well educated for Europeans in this area, were very good at doing. And therefore,
yeah,
I don't think it's that strange
information.
that Yasuke came before him, they hit it off, they talked in Japanese, and eventually, though, sadly we don't know the details, I would love to know those details. Somehow, within a few days, Yasuke has entered Nobunaga's service.
This guy's funny, he really likes to make up a lot of stuff.
In a month, he's gone to Nobunaga's castle town. There's another Jesuit record from there, and there's a Japanese record from there.
Did you see what he's saying? Jesuit records. That's what I'm trying to tell you. He's basing this off of what the Jesuits want to fabricate. The other one's still... this goes back, like I said, it goes back to Rome again, man. This ain't nothing new here. But there you have it with that type of stuff. You see what I'm saying? Now, we can fast forward back to where we were a little bit earlier, and let's get back there.
Birth in that traditional manner that you're talking about. At this point, we're probably talking most of them being peasant boys that were conscripted or were forced into it or went into it just so they could have something to eat. This is a time when people are starving everywhere. Mm-hmm. The armies would have been the best fed people, and there would have been plunder as well, and slaves to take, and there would have been profit in it. So status was a big thing at this point, and it was one of the most open times in Japanese history. You could make your name. Nobunaga's main retainer, a man called Hideyoshi, was born.
So they're trying to link slavery to Nobunaga through Japan. That's where the blame was coming from, it seems. And y'all from Japan can definitely comment on that because I think that's what this is leading to. Nobunaga enslaving people. But it's not him. It's people that are slaves from other people being brought over there on the shores. And like I said, Japan wasn't enslaving people. If there's any slavery, it would be amongst each other, among themselves. It's not them enslaving foreigners.
A peasant. He actually became...
The only evidence pointing to that was them trying to say Nobunaga was doing that. I mean, he wasn't a good person. That could be possible, but I'm not going to say that.
Nobunaga's successor after Nobunaga died. So he rose from literally the bottom, almost, to the top within his lifetime. He died quite early as well, maybe in his 50s, so it wasn't even a long life. He personifies this era in the same way that Yasuke does. Yasuke comes from abroad, but he's got the right skills at the right time and comes in there and offers those skills. Hideyoshi did the same. Many tens, hundreds of thousands of others were doing exactly the same at this time.
We talked about Nobunaga a bit more in a previous episode. He really did focus as well on using the foot soldiers much more than lots of his predecessors. He was willing to equip them and treat them better because they would form a core of an army. So are we seeing a bit of a blurring of the lines between the samurai and...
But you see this, these are two British people talking about Japanese history. A Japanese professional should have been there. But of course they're not going to do that because this goes back to what Ubisoft is doing. Like I said, you see it all aligns together. Even the history they use in Jesuits, it's not Japanese history. All of this is foreigners being scumbags.
And the soldier in Nobunaga's reign, so that someone like Yasuke can come along as a man who knows how to fight and make it into the ranks of a samurai, which he might not have been able to do previously.
You're 100% correct.
You just said that you don't have any evidence back then. It was a sumo wrestling. Shut the hell up.
Conscripted peasants, if you like, were called ashigaru, and they were distinct from samurai in the traditional sense, but they were still warriors in that they were fighting. 10 years later, after this, when the wars are starting to finish, when everything's kind of heading towards peace, those men and their families find themselves thrown out of that warrior class. The samurai class becomes a caste or a class, again, in a more traditional sense, and puts the walls up to all of the Johnny-come-latelys, if you like. So we don't know what happened to Yasuke at that point. We don't have any concrete records, but it would have been interesting to find out what happened to him at the same time as all the other peasant soldiers were finding that they were no longer needed.
Yeah, so he really does land on a sweet spot in Japanese history for him.
In that context, yeah.
What do we know about what happens
in that context
to Yasuke then after Nobunaga dies in 1582? Given that he is so close personally to Nobunaga and his relationship is with Nobunaga, do we know what happens to Yasuke after he's gone?
So Yasuke was there at Nobunaga's death. He possibly was the last person to see him alive.
It does not say that anywhere in Japanese history that he was there. This guy was there. Said he died unprotected too.
Nobunaga was killed in a coup d'etat, essentially. He was heading to the front with this small corps of men, of which Yasuke was one, around 30 people. And one of his generals, basically, we still don't know to this day why, he brought his whole army of 13,000 and attacked. They were all gunned down, essentially. Nobunaga, with Yasuke and his lover Ranmaru, come into the middle of the temple where their last moments are held. The temple is on fire around them. And nobody really is going to know what happened in that room because there's only 3 people and they all died, except for Yasuke. But we only...
Yeah, except for Yasuke. I mean, guys, it's just all stupid, you know what I mean? Like, it's just pretty obvious he was not there. And like I said, if he was somehow, I don't know how the hell he escaped out. If he's supposed to be a samurai, obviously he isn't, but this is just all... I can't take it serious.
We know that Yasuke survived because the Jesuits recorded as such. We don't know what he saw, unfortunately.
See, the Jesuits' recordings. Not Japan's recordings. Japan recordings do not mention it at all. He's not even there in Japanese recordings. He only exists as a samurai or any of that. This is all what the church is doing of Rome.
Legend goes, Nobunaga cut his belly, Ranmaru took his head off as his second, and then one supposes that Ranmaru then cut his belly and Yasuke took off Ranmaru's head. And the supposed last order is Yasuke.
Yeah, he took off with his head, with 13,000 people all having guns and stuff, and he escaped out with Jesus magic. I don't know who's supposed to believe that. Not somebody like me.
Yasuke saved my head. Yasuke runs with the head to Nobunaga's son, who's probably about 5 to 10 minutes walk.
He makes it
very close in a different tempo.
He's so skilled. He only has one hand. He's a legendary samurai. He dodged every single bullet. They just let him run away with the head after knowing how important that was. And he has the head running in his head. He somehow gets out with all that, doing that, and he makes it safely. And this is a fairy tale, bro.
Also about to be attacked. Also just putting up the defenses for a last-ditch stand. Of course, that doesn't last very long. He's dead within the hour or so. And all we know from the Jesuit source, there are no more Japanese sources, all we know from the Jesuit source is that
Jesuit source.
Yasuke was there at the last. He was one of the few survivors. He was taken prisoner. He surrendered his sword.
So who's telling us Japanese history, y'all? These two Europeans and Jesuits. Not Japan. When it comes to Assassin's Creed Shadow, who's doing it? Not Japan. They're not involved. It kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
And he was then escorted to the Jesuit mission, which was, again, only 5 minutes walk away. This is a very small area of Kyoto where all this happens.
Yeah, Jesuits are right there, 5 minutes away. Like I try to tell you, they were always there. That's true. They've been there the whole time. All this other stuff, I don't know about that. But this is what I mean. Invading other countries, messing with their history, and telling lies and all this type of stuff to fit certain agendas for profit and all that nonsense. But there you have it. The Jesuits always had hold of him. Nobunaga did not rule over him. No, the Jesuits had rulership over him the whole time. They're slave masters.
And the Jesuits give thanks to God for his deliverance. And sadly, that's the final word we have proven of Yasuke.
Oh, that's so frustrating. That must be really annoying for you.
It is. There's a lot of little politics in it. Why was he spared? Why didn't he die? You'll have to read the book if you want to find out the details about that. But
read his book. But there y'all have it. If y'all want to listen to the rest of this, I'm going to link it in my description. See? It's all coming, man. You see? Mastery right here. This is the sunlight, like I said. This is where it's coming from. We're doing all the right things here. We're getting all the right facts. We're deducting all the garbage. We're throwing away all the lies, and we're putting ignorant people in their place, and we're doing the right things, and we're staying aggressive, and we're doing this day by day. I've got 18 videos on this. This is how you be a professional. This is how you be a master. This is how you do it. Cover to cover. All right, y'all like, subscribe if y'all like this type of content. You know, if anything else comes up that I find, I'll let y'all know. Glad to do this. Honored to do this. Peace out, y'all.